their name, their phylum name, from the Latin word annelid, which means little ring. And so annelids are, think of like an earthworm. An earthworm is an annelid. And if you think of an earthworm, it's got like all the like little like grooves on it, right? Those are the little rings that they get their name from. So it means little ring. They are segmented worms, so those little bumps that you see on the surface, okay, that's actually a physical like segment in the worm, and they actually have tissue that will separate internally all of those parts of their body. Yes?
What are those things?
Okay, they also have bilateral symmetry. They also have 3 cell layers. Earthworms, though, have a true coelom, okay, and so they have a true fluid-filled cavity between the mesoderm and their internal organs. So here's the comparison between a nematode worm and an annelid. Okay, so in order to have a true coelom, okay, the fluid-filled cavity has to be completely surrounded by the mesoderm. Okay, if it's completely surrounded by the mesoderm, then it's considered to be a true coelom. Okay, so in your nematode worm over here, okay, you have your ectoderm, your mesoderm, and your endoderm, and then you've got your pseudocoelom, okay, in between. Do you see that? In a coelom, okay, the mesoderm completely surrounds that that fluid-filled space. So this is all the mesoderm right here, okay, and here's part of your coelom over here. The mesoderm surrounds it completely. Okay, so that's considered to be a true coelom. Whereas a pseudocoelom, it's like pseudo, like fake, right? A fake coelom, or the mesoderm only surrounds it on one side. Do you see that? Okay, so annelids have a true coelom. So here, let's look at this. So this is a comparison of the 3 worm types, so you can actually see what it looks like. Okay, so flatworms up here, okay, they have the 3 cell layers, but no pseudocoelom or coelom. Okay, so you've got the ectoderm, the mesoderm, and the endoderm, and the gastrovascular cavity inside. So those are their 3 cell layers. In a nematode worm, okay, the blue is the ectoderm, the mesoderm's red. You've got your pseudocoelom, your fluid-filled space, and then you've got your endoderm and your digestive tract in here. Do you see that?
So if you dissected them, like cut them open, all the fluid would come out?
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. And then down here, this is an annelid. Okay, this is a true coelom. Okay, so you have your ectoderm on the outside, endoderm in here. Here's your fluid-filled space, and can you see the red, how it completely surrounds that fluid-filled space? So that's a true coelom. Does that make sense? Okay. So you have your 3 cell layers, the endoderm, the ectoderm, and the mesoderm. Okay, the ectoderm develops into the epidermis or the skin. The mesoderm is going to develop into like the muscles, and then your endoderm is going to develop into your digestive system and other internal organs. Okay, so what? Mesentery is going to be things like that surround organs and kind of hold things in place, really. Okay. So why do we have to talk about a coelom? Here's why. The coelom actually is important for animals, and you have a coelom as well, actually. So what it does is it actually provides separation from the internal organs and the body wall. Okay? And when it does that, it actually allows for your internal organs or your body wall to move independently of each other. Okay, so if you had breakfast this morning, your stomach is in your belly, right? And you've got your coelom, so it's like a fluid-filled space in between your stomach and your actual like abs, right? And so if you ate this morning, your stomach is like moving around and mixing up all of that food and working on digesting your breakfast. But if you look at your stomach right now, you're not going to see that, are you? Okay? That's because there's a separation. So you've got your actual abs, your body wall, and then your stomach behind there, and your stomach's moving behind there to digest your food. If they were not separated, anytime your stomach moved, your abs would move. Okay, so you'd like watch and people, you could see like their stomach moving as they're digesting their food. That would be weird. Okay, so it allows for independent movement behind the body wall. Okay, and it also provides some protection for those internal organs as well. Okay, so it allows for independent movement. It also allows for a spot for a true circulatory system to develop. Okay, so the true circulatory system can be formed inside of that coelom. And that as that coelomic fluid kind of moves around, okay, it can help to deliver oxygen and pick up carbon dioxide, and then it can also help to deliver nutrients and pick up waste products. Okay, so that's why it's important, right? And so you've got your coelom, right, which is in your belly, and then you've also got another cavity which contains like your lungs and your heart and stuff like that. Okay. It allows for independent movement. Okay, so classes of annelids. The class of annelids that we're most likely to find in the ocean is class Polychaeta. So polychaete worms. These are bristly marine worms. So on each segment, they have these two little extensions, one on either side of their body, that are called pseudopods. Oh, not pseudopods, sorry, parapodia. And those little parapodia have attached to them like these bristles. So think of like wiry, strong hairs. Okay, so they've got these bristles that are attached to them, and they'll use those to like swim or move around. Okay, and so this picture right here in the upper right, this is a sea mouse. Okay, this is a marine polychaete worm. Okay, so polychaete worms are going to be serving a lot of different functions in the ocean. They can be predators. So some of them will actually have like jaws, and they'll move around and hunt for prey. Some of them are filter feeders, okay, or well, actually technically suspension feeders. So remember these pictures, okay? This picture right here and this upper right picture, those are marine polychaete worms, okay? So what you're seeing there, those are actually just their gills, okay? And the rest of the actual worm's body is below the surface. So they are worms, okay? And so they are going to be suspension feeders, right? Feeding on things like phytoplankton and zooplankton and detritus that are in the water. Oh, goodness. Okay, let's see. So those are polychaete worms. Oligochaete worms, those are earthworms. Those are terrestrial. You'll find them on land. Hopefully you're fairly familiar with what an earthworm looks like. Okay, there's your little earthworm. Okay, yeah. Okay, Hirudinea. These are leeches. Okay, so leeches are mostly freshwater, but we actually do have a saltwater marine leech. And they are annelid worms that have suckers at both ends of their body. One of those suckers will contain their mouth. Okay, and in their mouth they've got like 3 teeth that they will use to bite on to you, okay, or to their prey. And they'll cut through the skin, and they secrete like an anticoagulant and also an anesthetic. Okay, so the anesthetic makes it so you don't feel it when they bite, right? It's like a numbing thing. And then the anticoagulant means that your blood won't clot, so they can just kind of sit there and suck your blood and it won't clot. Okay, and so they are parasites. There is a marine leech. They did used to be used for like medical purposes, and actually they still are in some cases. So they actually can be helpful in some cases medically. But they used to think that like the health of your body depended on 4 humors. So the phlegm, the blood, black bile, and yellow bile. And as long as all of those humors were in balance, you were healthy. And so if you were sick, then clearly it was because one of those humors was out of balance. So they'd use leeches to like suck out your blood because they think that you had too much blood, basically. So that's why you were sick. So they would use leeches to bleed people. That's also why they would cut like people's arms and bleed. Yeah. Nowadays we use it because in certain kinds of like swelling and stuff like that, they're actually helpful to get rid of some of the trapped blood. So yeah, they can be helpful. And they are parasites on some kinds of fish and stuff like that. All right, form and function in annelids. So how do they do all of their life processes? We're going to use earthworms as our model marine annelid, mostly because that's probably what you're most familiar with, right? So you know something about marine worms or earthworms. Okay, so let's look at their digestive system, how they digest food. They have a complete digestive system, mouth to anus. Food enters into the mouth through the pharynx, through the esophagus, where it ends up in the crop. Okay, the crop is a holding tank, basically. Okay, so it holds food there. And then when the gizzard is ready for it, the crop will send the food to the gizzard. The gizzard is a grinding organ. Okay, so it takes all that food and it grinds it up and helps to digest it. Okay, then it gets sent to the intestine where all of those nutrients are absorbed, and then any waste products exit out the anus. Okay, so it's got a complete one-way digestive system. No, the thick band will be elsewhere. Yes, earthworms eat dirt. Yes, and some marine annelids will as well. Yeah, kind of like eat their way through. Yes. Okay, their respiratory system. So if they're aquatic, aka marine annelids, they will have gills in order to capture oxygen. So they will have gills. And so those things that we were looking at, those worms at the very, very beginning, that look all pretty, those are actually the gills of the animal. Okay, so they stick their gills out in order to feed. But like earthworms actually will do respiration through their skin. Okay, so they don't have like gills or lungs or anything like that. Their skin remains wet, moist, and they will be able to exchange oxygen through their skin, and that's all they need. So that they don't have a full respiratory system. So here's a picture, and so you can see, okay, so see like the little segments here? Okay, and notice that at those like little indentations, that's actually where tissue comes through the worm and separates it into different segments. Okay, and so in each of these segments, they're going to have like some of the same organs. So like they're going to have like 2 kidneys in each of those. All right, stuff like that. So that's what they look like. Their circulatory system, they actually have a closed circulatory system. So that means that their blood is always contained in blood vessels like yours. Okay, so blood is always in blood vessels and then gets pumped by hearts around the body. Earthworms actually have 5 hearts to pump the blood. And so you can see on this picture, okay, the red, that's their blood vessels, and then their hearts are located up here. They've got like 5 accessory hearts and then 1 main heart. And they're just essentially blood vessels that can squeeze, okay, and help to push the blood around. Okay, and the blood circulates through and delivers oxygen and picks up carbon dioxide. If it's a marine worm, then that blood's going to go to the gills to get rid of the carbon dioxide and get oxygen. If it's an earthworm, it's going to diffuse through the skin. They can have like eye spots. Yeah, so they can have eye spots. They can also have like statocysts in order to tell up from down. Okay. They will also, a lot of marine annelids will have sensory tentacles, so they're like protrusions by the sides of their mouth that have like chemical receptors on there to help them to find prey. So they'll have like tentacles around their mouth and chemical receptors to help to find food. They do have a brain, and then they also have a ventral nerve cord that runs down their belly. Okay? Oops, sorry, I forgot to scroll down. Here it is. So the excretory system. So they actually have what are called nephridia, basically kidneys in each of their segments. And I'm going to go back so you can actually see that. So this green thing, that would be their nephridia, their kidney. Okay, and so this little tubule is going to filter any waste product out of that fluid that's in the coelom. Okay, and then they've got little pores, okay, on their segments of their body that they'll use to get rid of those waste products. So that's them essentially peeing. Okay. to get rid of waste products. So they have kidneys in each section. Sorry about that. Okay, you got the nervous system too? Okay. Okay, how they move. They have longitudinal and circular muscles. So that means that longitudinal, it runs the length of their body. Okay, and circular means it wraps around their body. Okay, so what they do is they actually alternate squeezing each set of muscles. Okay, so if this is my worm, okay, the circular muscles wrap around it. When they contract those circular muscles, it elongates the body of the worm. Okay, so it pushes it out this way, right? So kind of squeezes it like that. Okay, and so it elongates them. When they relax those and they contract their longitudinal muscles, it's going to pull the worm this way, right? And so they're going to alternate, like elongating with their circular muscles and then shortening themselves with their longitudinal. Elongating with their circular, shortening themselves with their longitudinal. Okay, and they've got these little things called setae, like little bristle hairs that they'll use to like grip onto the surface and pull themselves forward. All right? Does that make sense? Okay. Good. We'll finish this next. Okay, so how worms move. So they have longitudinal and circular muscles that work together. And so the circular muscles actually wrap around the body like this way. Okay, and then the longitudinal muscles are going to run from head to tail on a worm. Okay, and so they will alternately contract the circular and the longitudinal muscles in order to move. In order to be able to contract and extend those muscles, worms will actually rely on what's called a hydrostatic skeleton. And here's the main idea between a hydrostatic skeleton. So a worm, if you picture like a bag of water, okay, so a Ziploc bag that you go to the sink, you fill up with water, and you zip it closed. Okay, if you were to take that bag of water in your hands and you were to like squeeze it, okay, you would be able to change the shape of that bag of water, but you're not actually going to be able to change the volume or the amount of water that's in there. Okay, so you cannot actually compress water. Okay, it's impossible. All sorts of like stuff in like machinery and stuff depends on this property of water, that you cannot actually compress it. Okay, so worms have basically a sac full of water. It's called their coelom, okay, if you're talking about annelid worms, or their pseudocoelom if you're talking about nematode worms. So they've got their fluid-filled cavity. So when these worms contract their circular muscles around the outside of their body, it squeezes on that fluid of inside of their coelom, and it elongates their body. Okay, so let me draw you a picture. So if this is our worm's body, okay, the circular muscles go around, okay, and when they squeeze these circular muscles, it makes the worm longer and skinnier, okay, because it compresses or squeezes on that water and changes the shape of the water inside of the coelom and elongates the body of the worm. In order for a muscle to re-extend, okay, you can't actively stretch a muscle, so like re-extend a muscle. So think of like contracting your bicep. Okay, so when you contract your bicep, that bicep pulls on the lower half of your arm, which pulls it up, and you make like like you're flexing your arm to show off your big biceps. Okay, and so that bicep, when it's contracted, and then when you want to relax it, okay, and re-extend your arm, you're not going to simply just be able to sit here and like think about it and like re-extend your bicep and just push it out and stretch and straighten your arm. What happens is, in order to relax or stretch out your bicep again, you have your tricep on the other side, which actually will pull, okay, on the opposite side, pull on the opposite side of your arm and pull on your bone in your lower arm and re-extend your arm. So what happens is you actually have muscles that are in antagonistic pairs, and so when one is contracted, the other is relaxed, and then when you relax one, the other contracts, and it allows for muscles to be re-extended and to go back to their original relaxed state. So worms have antagonistic pairs of muscles as well. Their longitudinal and their circular muscles work in antagonistic pairs. And so when you squeeze on the circular muscles of a worm, when they squeeze, it squeezes on the fluid that's inside of their coelom and elongates their body. Okay? When those circular muscles relax, the way that they get stretched back out in order to allow the worm to return to like its original shape is by the contraction of the longitudinal muscles. So when the longitudinal muscles contract, okay, draw it in green. So when these muscles contract, they shorten the worm, okay, back to its original like flat, fatter state, okay. And because again it's pulling on the fluid inside, it squeezes the worm, makes it fatter, which pushes on those circular muscles and re-extends the circular muscles. So then the worm can then contract the circular muscles again and elongate the worm again. So they're able to move by alternately contracting the circular and longitudinal muscles, which allows for the muscles to be re-extended, and they all work against the resistance of that hydrostatic skeleton and the property of water that it is incompressible. Worms also have these things that are called lattices. So they're basically proteins that are wound around the worm, and basically those proteins direct the flow of the fluid in the worm. So they allow for those muscles to be able to contract and direct the flow of fluid so that when those muscles contract, you don't get like bulges or kinks in the worm. So here's a picture actually of the lattices. This is what they would look like. And so they allow for the water to be directed so that the worm stays like in the nice even worm shape, and you don't get like the muscles contracting and a big bulge forming, because that would be counterproductive and could also burst the side of the worm and kill it. So it needs its lattices in order to be able to direct the flow of water. Okay, advantages and disadvantages of a hydrostatic skeleton. The advantages are that it's really resistant to impact damage. So worms don't readily break, buckle, or burst. It's very flexible. Okay, so like distortions aren't harmful. Okay, so you can like take a worm and tie it in a knot and it'll be fine. Okay, so that's fine. But if you were to take like your arm and tie it in a knot, that would be bad. That would be breaking bones. Okay, that would be bad. Your skeleton does not work that way. A hydrostatic skeleton is fine because for a worm because it allows for them to be able to distort themselves and actually fit through places that other things can't fit through, like in the ground and dirt and stuff. Disadvantages of a hydrostatic skeleton: the skeleton does depend on hydration, so worms have to live where there is water. So you find a lot of them in the ocean or damp places. It also requires a lot of muscle in order to be able to move. So and muscle costs a lot of energy, takes a lot of energy to maintain. So a worm has to have a lot of muscle in order to be able to move. And a hydrostatic skeleton doesn't really allow for a lot of structure, like an upright structure, like humans have. So they are going to be worming away on the floor of on the ground, which means that they're going to have a lot of surface area on the ground, which means there's going to be a lot of friction. So it's going to be harder to move. And it's also harder for a nervous system to completely control precisely the body parts, because it's all dependent on the movement of fluids. So it's much more fluid environment. Okay, the reproductive system. Annelid worms are hermaphrodites, like earthworms and leeches. Some annelids are actually going to have separate sexes, but since we're using earthworms as our model marine annelid, that's what we're going to look at. So basically, they have internal fertilization. So you get two hermaphroditic worms that will come together and copulate, and each will pass sperm to the other. And then they will actually store the sperm in the clitellum. So if you ever have seen an earthworm and you see the thing on their body that looks kind of like a Band-Aid on them, that's their clitellum. That's actually their reproductive organs. That's where they store the sperm. And then they'll fertilize the eggs, okay, and then they actually produce mucus and slide that clitellum off of their body, and the fertilized eggs are inside of that, and it acts as kind of like a cocoon, and the little baby worms develop inside of it, and then once they're fully developed, they will crawl out and hatch into the soil. So the clitellum forms their reproductive organs. Ecology of annelids, they're important for a couple of things. If earthworms are important to the soil, they help to aerate the soil and stuff like that. But this is marine bio, so we're more interested in the ocean. And in the ocean, annelid worms are at the bottom of the food chain. So a lot of times they're filter feeders or suspension feeders or deposit feeders. And so they're going to be working to pass energy up the food chain to higher levels of the food chain. So they start off a lot of the food webs in the ocean. And there's my works cited. Okay, so I would highly suggest that you understand how worms move and include lattices in your description. So please make sure that you understand that. If you need to, email me, message me, and I will hopefully be able to get back to you and help you out. So study hard.